it's great to be here. Let me just get started while they sort through the presentation. I'm going to start with two fundamental factors that are really affecting the change that I see in our business regarding content. And I'm sure what's interesting is that when I started my career in content, everyone was curious what content was, and so we got to make it up as we went along. And now I feel like content is everywhere, and it's permeated every conversation that we still have to figure out what it is, and a lot of us still make it up. But the fact is, it's a fundamental piece of driving business outcomes for every one of our clients here and every one of our clients in the US. And the reason is that we have this thing called fragmentation. Now, you've probably heard this word a lot. You've probably heard a saturated attention economy, or you've just heard it as simply choice. But the fact is, we've really taken, when I was in Japan trying to explain fragmentation because it doesn't translate in Japanese, I said, imagine taking a plate of glass and dropping it on the floor and having it shatter into 1,000,000 pieces. And on every one of those pieces, you have the opportunity to reach a consumer. And you can do that through content, you can do it through advertising, but one would argue the most effective way that you can really do it is driving a conversation, and that can really begin with really great content. So if you think about fragmentation on one side of the equation, and you think about this idea of commoditization on the other. And when I think about commoditization, it's hard running an agency network because basically what we've done is reduce the value of media to dollars and cents. You know, there's a lot of pressure on us and on our publishing partners here to ensure that we're delivering value for you, efficiency for you, scale for you. But there's a lot of pressure on you to do that within your budgets, and consequently that means there's a lot of pressure on us to do it within those budgets, and to push our fee down, and then to go to our publishers every time and say, can you do me a favor just one more time? I'm sure Liz has probably heard this from our team 1,000,000 times at Yahoo, but the fact is, instead of asking for added value as a way to look at those inflated CPMs and say, okay, we should actually talk about value creation. How do we create value for you every time we sit at the table and negotiate media? So let's just start with the universal truth, right? Let's just get it out on the table. The best way to reach people are through stories. And the reason that we reach people through stories is because they fundamentally want to be entertained. They want to escape from their everyday life. They want to learn something. They want to do something. And we can provide that, right? We can provide that. And in fact, if you think about the idea that we work with Hollywood, the biggest creators of entertainment, not that they own the lock on it, but the biggest creators of entertainment, and this idea that what we've done in our careers is actually try to wrap ourselves around that entertainment. Most of the time what we've done is try to interrupt that experience by pushing messaging at them. So we're trying to fundamentally change the way in which we reach brands, we reach consumers through content by really thinking about this marriage. And what this marriage requires is just an understanding of their business model. So Hollywood spends $1.4 trillion entertaining people. And this isn't just Hollywood, it's Xbox, it's the experiences, it's concerts, it's Live Nation, it's anyone who's trying to entertain consumers. Now, that's a really big number. But if you think about the idea that brands have been trying to integrate into this content since the dawn of television. Texaco actually sponsored the first show. It was a fully sponsored show. Mutual of Omaha, those of you who are not millennials and my age can remember sort of Mutual of Omaha, learning about animals in the wild. Those were sponsored shows that were a single brand. And then what we did is we decided, okay, we're going to split it up. We took an hour, we put 8 commercial breaks in an hour. And then we said we're going to put 6 commercials in each one of those breaks. Right? And it was great because they had nowhere else to go. So we started integrating into the content. And if you think about this number about product placement, 8.3 billion. But the fact is, we're really one of the few countries that legally allows brands to integrate into content. Now, there are some restrictions in terms of alcohol and cigarettes, but for the most part, we've been able to do this. So UK just broke down their laws and said, let's find a way for brands to integrate into content because we're not reaching consumers, enough of them in commercial time. All right, so that number's going to grow, great. But let's go back to this really interesting thing about product placement. You see that little, oh, this is clicking, that little Coca-Cola can, or it's actually a cola can. You know what? You talk to a director and you say, okay, I really need you to integrate this brand. They're paying $1 million and they're going to help support this, right? And then the director, who's got to deliver a piece of content that the studio is excited about, that you and I will pay $14 and a megaplex to go see, says, okay, okay, and it's at cross purposes with what he or she has to deliver, and so he or she puts that can on the ground and they call that product in placement. And then what happens is that makes its way to the screen, and then we know what happens. There are ads that surround it, and what we're trying to do is interrupt that experience. And now what we can do is we can have multiple screens, which is why we're here today in the digital world, to try to surround that content so that we know that they're not paying attention to our ad on TV. So we're going to try to capture them as they're surfing online or on their phones. And so one of the things that I like to tell brands, and I do this very deferentially because I actually want brands to succeed, is that we must encourage you to stop interrupting what people are interested in and start becoming what people are interested in. And I'm sure you've actually seen this where brands succeed, right? I'm sure you've shared pieces of content that are actually branded content. So it does work. So what we want to be able to do is say, okay, brand, let's think about all the environments that you can be, even outside of television. How can we integrate into not just TV, but gaming and fashion and whatever else was on there? It was a couple other things, digital and music, actually. Music is a big thing. As a matter of fact, you know what's so fascinating to me is that 5 years ago when I was working at MTV, do you know how hard it was to get an artist to want to actually be sort of partnered with a brand? It was selling out. Now if you think about music, music doesn't exist without brands. Brands really have embraced, have actually become music producers and really finding stars and celebrating those and putting them in their advertising and their content and making overnight hits. So that relationship has completely changed. And this idea of custom content, you know, we call it, I struggle with how to think about content. Content marketing is probably something we're all very used to. And content marketing can be defined in many different ways, and actually what happens is when we start defining it, then it has different budgets that we pull from. But the fact is that 92% more effective than traditional TV, and yet where does all the money go? I'm sure you actually wonder to yourself, how do I get them to give me more dollars? I can prove that it's more effective, but everybody, you know, the thing is, I used to say, everyone loves the idea. Like, I had a client who was in American Idol for the first season. They stayed for almost every season. But he didn't really, like, we could tell him, it's not really going to help your brand. Like, just because they're drinking out of a cup doesn't make you sort of a big player in sort of finding new talent. But what he loved about it was that his kids and those younger members of his staff would watch American Idol and they'd be like, my God, our brand is really cool. Or my dad has a really cool job because he partners with American Idol. So despite the fact that we can prove how effective it is, we still have to fight against that notion that it's more prevalent in terms of a cultural relevance if it comes from TV than if it comes from anywhere else. And I think that's actually changing, and I'm excited about that change. And the reason I'm excited is because branded content is actually something consumers actively choose, right? When they're looking for something, they find branded content. When it's environments they trust, they consume that content. And they seek it out because they heard it was good. Travis is here today, one of my favorite people in social. And Travis actually said, one of his latest, he always sends like, hey, have you guys seen this? And he sent Kiss. Is that what it's called, the Kiss? The kiss, First Kiss, right? How many of you saw First Kiss, right? Now, how many of you, when it first came out, you were excited because you thought, boy, this is a social experiment. They found people off the street and they put them in a studio and they said, make out, right? And there was the awkwardness. And then there was a big backlash because it was actually a piece of sponsored content. A brand actually went out and found these people and created this. And the fact is, it would still have been the same quality of content. We still would have adopted it at the same rate if the brand had just been transparent in their ambition to create this cultural moment, right? And it was just a lesson about, it doesn't really matter that there's a brand attached to it as long as it's really good and it's worthy of being shared. So I think about the content discovery for me has always been through the lens of people like Travis, because he's a great curator and I am someone who is very busy and at times lazy, and I'm not as cool as Travis and really depend on him to be my social lens, which I get to stand up here and be cooler because of. And the fact is that people choose this content because it is entertaining or it actually provides value. The other day, my sink stopped up, and I was determined that I was not going to call a plumber. I mean, it became a fight in my house because I can do these things. So I went online and I searched, how do you fix a sink? Now, it took me all day to fix a sink, but I was really proud at the end of that day that I could turn on the faucet and it drained without any issue. And the only reason that I could do that is because I went online and I asked a question, and a great brand gave me an answer and told me how to get those supplies at the store, where to find them, and then who I could ask in store if I had any questions. So there are these two fundamental truths, entertaining and actually educational. And the one thing I would caution, and I know our friends from Facebook have been here and I'm a great fan of them, but the fact is, just because you build it, it's not a cornfield in Iowa, okay? You've got to do the work to distribute this content. Very few brands get lucky with lightning in a bottle. I give the Chipotle example, and it's a bit stale, but I do it for two reasons. One, it was a great story, the scarecrow. But I do it because they really didn't have a lot of money to promote that piece of content. They invested quite a bit in the actual production of it. So they made two strategic choices. The first one is that they would use out-of-home or they use cinematic and a bit of digital to really create awareness among what would be their key loyalists. So they put it in front of other content that they knew would be a similar match in terms of the consumer. And Coldplay is the soundtrack of Scarecrow. And so what they did is they took all of their budget and they bought one spot. It was the A position in the Grammys after Coldplay won their Grammy and played the song. And there was such buzz coming out of the show and into that spot that everybody wanted to know what it was about. And so then they spent the last dollar that they had on search because they knew people would be searching, and there they were serving up that piece of content, that answer. So you think about this, you've really got to have an integrated strategic approach of how you're going to scale that content. And I'm not here to tell you what platform is the best. That's what these guys are all here for. I'm just here to tell you that it's really hard to create the next version of content if you don't scale the first one. I have a lot of clients who are one and done. And it's very depressing because it's hard enough to get people to say yes to something that feels a little out of the box. So when we don't do a good enough job scaling it, it's hard to go back and ask for a second opportunity to prove our point. So where we get to this Madison and Vine intersection is that it's incumbent upon you as a brand in this converging world to behave like media owners. And I say this because you have a lot of power in the marketplace. You have a lot more owned channels, and you have a lot more opportunity to earn media. And when you go into the marketplace and you spend those dollars, you have a lot of leverage in those moments of negotiation. And that's where I say, don't think about it as added value when you ask for additional integrations or more content or distribution for your own content. Think about it as how does that publisher and how does your agency partner create more value creation for you, and you can decide how you want that sort of to manifest. Is it more distribution, more scale? Is it greater opportunity to be in stories? Or is it just you want to create original content together because your story is unique and you need a point of view from a different storyteller? So it's really about behaving like media owners. And agencies, believe it or not, have been acting like media owners for quite some time. And I put these up because this is the world that we live in, right? WPP did an amazing deal with Yahoo a few years ago where they said, we want to bring our brands together and create content together. OMD did an upfront for their clients where they actually brought their top clients into Hollywood, and they brought directors and writers and talent. And they basically did a pre-upfront, but it was these talented people pitching the brand on what they could do for them. And Dentsu, our parent company, actually has invested in creating content. They've created pop groups. So there's a pop group that they created in Tokyo that then they iterated in 12 different cities around Asia. So it's not even American Idol. They just created a pop group, and what they did is they made a lot of content. And then they turned that content into media, and they were able to have an IP that's actually very valuable. So now they're in the concert production business and the talent management business. And even at Aegis, we created the Story Lab a few years ago, and I had the privilege of being a part of that team that created it, because we really felt like our brands needed to tell stories in a different way. And the Story Lab came together because it is the art and science of storytelling. It's not just about a piece of content that feels good or looks good, but it's about the science of how do we understand the insights that go into making that content, and how do we think about the communication architecture that goes into scaling it. And so in our business, we talk about 4 things that the Story Lab does: social, activation, originals, and strategy. And I don't think content can exist if any one of those things are not working in concert. However, because we have a lot of agencies who talk about doing content, and a lot of them do, we say, what are your superpowers? And if you can identify your superpowers, then those are the ones that you actually get to promote, and everyone else of the agencies gets to stand back and say that's what they do. So in an effort to then create a lane, a swim lane for the Story Lab, we really look at activation and originals. Activation is very simply, how do we surround or integrate into existing content? And originals is exactly that. How do we create content on behalf of our brands? Now, the reason that Story Lab can do that is we call it content fluency. And this is something you should ask yourself in your organizations: who actually speaks the language of content? Well, first you have to understand who are the stakeholders in that conversation. So there's obviously the brand. Who can speak on behalf of the brand the most succinctly when it comes to what are the stories that you can tell with some layer of authenticity, right? Really be true to your brand. What is the publisher after? So how do we speak the language of the publisher? If you're talking to BuzzFeed, what are the things that they do really well? And who really understands how to talk to BuzzFeed through a filter that they will understand? So you're not going to say, just because I have a big budget, you have to do this. No, it doesn't work. How do you make sure that you understand what they do really well? What are the superpowers of BuzzFeed, and how do you exploit those to your advantage? And then finally, who's a really good storyteller? What are the pieces, what is the narrative of a great story, and who can tell that on your behalf? Is it your branded content agency? Is it your search agency? Is it your creative agency? Is it someone internally? And all those pieces have to do that at the service of the consumer. So you can speak all those different languages. If you're fluent in all 3, then what you're able to do is actually speak directly to the consumer and tell the story that they want to hear, that they will share on your behalf, that will change their perception of your brand. So this is an eye chart, and if you want it, I'll give it to you afterwards. But I just really want to say, like, the principles, the tenets of really great content, in terms of those brands who are going to embrace it. Do you have a vision for it? Which I actually, do you have a gut for it? Like, are you going to be able to do this? Because it takes some work. And it takes some evangelizing internally. Do you have a voice? Is it distinct in the marketplace? If you're Red Bull, you know who you are. They're easy, right? But not all brands are easy. But once you fundamentally know who you are, you find your voice. That voice has to permeate everything that you do with consistency. How are you adding value? So how is it something fresh and new in the world? You know, the thing is, the problem is everything is derivative. The Bachelor, the Bachelorette, the Bachelor Pad. You know, like all these things, like we get a good idea, and what we try to do is we try to milk it and extend it in as many ways as we can. Because we don't think we're capable of coming up with a better new idea. So we just take the old idea, we make it better. And there's nothing wrong with that. How do we be evocative? Now, there's something that is evocative, and then there's the provocative, right? And sometimes they work hand in hand. But how do you evoke an emotion, an engagement? How does something happen quickly? How do you drive velocity? What is that scale that we need to create? And how are you versatile? So again, versatility is like rinse, repeat, learn, rinse, repeat, learn. All right, so I'm going to tell you, actually I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to show you. But single stories is an example of all those things working together. And I use this, I actually have 2 liquor examples. I promise you I'm not an alcoholic. But I just happen to think that they have a tough time reaching consumers because they're really sort of, there's a big regulation about how they can do that. So they have to be smart. We have to be smarter. But this was that moment where we wanted to do something different, and we started with an insight. So it all comes back to knowing your consumer, right? That is the smartest thing that you can do, is know who they are. The insight was that Scotch drinkers don't want to talk about Scotch. They don't want to share in the social space about Scotch. They want to have an intimate, they sit down with their buddies, usually in a one-on-one occasion, and just want to have a moment where they share, right? They're not going to share about their life all that much. You know, it's just that they want to sit back and have a neat Scotch and just relax. Not a lot of fanfare. So what we did is we said, you had a limited amount of money. We don't have enough to really buy a lot of TV. But we're going to go work with a partner that will provide us value in the most important thing we need, talent. So we went to a great storyteller that had great talent, and they spoke on behalf of the brand. And we then used digital to really start spreading that, because that's where we could do it, where we had authenticity, where we had permission. They had an app, they had a magazine, like all the things that we needed. We could place it in their owned environments. And then what we did is we just sat back, we turned a couple dials in terms of media, some paid social, some digital, and it took off. And it took off because we got lucky, right? So a lot of this comes down to luck. I'd love to say really smart all the way around, and it was. But we got really lucky because we found Bryan Cranston at his most important moment. And so when you find a piece of talent and you're smart in terms of, and I use the word exploit a lot because I believe in exploitation, but exploiting a cultural moment to your benefit is actually one of the best, most smartest, cheapest things that you can do. So I'll just let the tape speak for itself.
In 2013, the Glenlivet sought to build brand equity, differentiation, and distinctive personality amongst novice, single malt drinkers. Whiskey was undergoing a period of rapid expansion, thanks to the cultural influence of Mad Men and growing appreciation of artisanship. Aficionados were moving towards drinking their Scotch neat. Working from Visium's insight that the Glenlivet gentleman preferred one-on-one drinking occasions and wasn't using social media unless it proved meaningful, Visium tapped the Story Lab to produce content that would appeal to this discerning man. So how does a brand evolve its traditional advertising to create emotional moments that form lasting personal connections with their consumers? The Story Lab created Single Stories for the Sundance Channel, a distribution partner with a brand name synonymous with intimate storytelling. Currently running on the Sundance Channel and Sundance.com, Single Stories was created to deliver that authentic one-on-one experience that the target desires, now between the storyteller and the viewer. These visionaries, entrepreneurs, and cultural icons each share intimate stories of the viewer of a pivotal moment that changed their lives forever.
I thought I was going to be a policeman until college, and now I'm going to be an actor.
A perfect single story to be enjoyed over the #1 single malt in the United States.
Close to 1 billion people on the planet that don't have access to glasses, and we need the work that we're doing to be solving these problems.
If it's about the fact that this is the thing that you love to do, then sit down and write another screenplay.
In my life, I do everything by instinct. My sixth sense guides me in every decision I make.
My mother told me, always keep your eyes open. You know, I'm not saying no, 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 no. It's like, okay, try it, see if you like it.
You're never going to have a successful career unless you have this other component, and that's luck. And it could shine on them at any moment, so keep going.
Beyond Sundance TV and digital, we distributed this content through the brand's Facebook page and loyalty club site, as well as through the brand's bought media. The campaign has reached unprecedented success. Over 4 million people have logged on to view Single Stories content.
Wow.
10 million impressions have occurred on the Sundance Channel, and almost 60 million online. In addition, the Glenlivet's loyalty club increased by 9.3%, and the social media post introducing the Bryan Cranston content had an astonishing 13% share rate amongst loyal brand drinkers.
This is going pretty damn well.
All surpassing expectations and proving that a story well told bears repeating.
That's what makes for hopefully good storytelling.
It was at that moment that I thought, this is fantastic.
The voice started inside, telling me, this is special.
It was not only about skateboarding, it was about music. It was about graphic design. It was a whole culture.
It's one of those memories that's inspired me to sort of have my professional life hopefully geared towards doing good in the world.
Just remember, only bad things make good stories.
So I don't necessarily believe that what Bryan says, that only bad things make good stories. But what we did is we actually drafted off the equity of these storytellers. So we weren't out there saying, as a brand, we were telling stories. We were just amplifying those stories of great cultural purveyors at the moment. We didn't know that Warby Parker was going to take off when we chose them. We actually told the brand, we're going to get a few people who sit in that bucket of they could blow up at any minute, and then we're going to go find some sort of tried and true storytellers. And we got really lucky that a few of them were they just found their cultural moment during the campaign, and we took advantage of that with some smart and strategic paid and owned media. Now, the other thing to think about, and this is really also, when we think about content, we also think about the monetization of your own content. So we work with two clients. They happen to be in the entertainment industry, so it's an easy example. But what we've done is we've actually created first look deals so that we can take their content and we can take it out to all of our brands and say, how do we want to tell different stories with these particular clients? So think about what it is, what are the assets that you have that you might be able to share with one of your partners that creates some opportunity to co-brand with other partners, one, to drive some monetization for your own content, but also to create scale. So we've got a couple things with Universal coming up with the clients that have not only just done integrations, but we've really pushed that all the way through the line in terms of their marketing. So from red carpet events to contests, which I think are the sort of the table stakes, all the way through at dealership and how we bring that to life. So it's just really trying to think about this model from the many different facets of that prism. So what leads us to is a paradigm shift. And I'm going to leave you with 3 examples. Now, the first one is a big example. I have to make sure I'm in this order. Yes. The first one is a big example. And you know, I was sort of getting the highlights of the couple days, and I know this is not a micro adventure. This is climbing Mount Everest. So I just want to put that in context. GM, when we won GM 2 years ago, we went into the upfront and they said, we don't want to be a checkbook anymore. We spend a lot of money and people take advantage of us. We want to tell our own stories. So we went out with 5 stories, 5 ideas. And we went to the advertising side of the house and we said, we want to meet with your development execs. We want to be a collaborator, a creative collaborator with you on behalf of GM. And they graciously and rightfully opened up the door to the other side of the house. It's interesting when you walk into the other door, when the advertising knocks on it and says, hey, we need you to meet with them. We don't really know if there's any value to it, but just do it. And in many cases, there were heads of development at some major networks that said, we don't tell you how to sell cars, don't tell us how to make content. Right? Pretty bold. And we thought, wow, this is not the right approach. So what we did is we found a partner who was willing to collaborate in what I call half-baked ideas, which means that we get to bake the other half together. And we sat down and said, this is the type of story we want to tell. See, we've got to change the perception of GM in terms of their cars, right? We need to connect with the consumer in a way that is evocative, that we can be versatile. And they said, great, we want a reality series that feels big, right? We want to transform our network. So we pitched the idea of Project Runway for cars. They said, we love it. Great, we got a deal. Took 2 years to finalize that deal because it was something that had never been done. GM was doing a media buy, but they were doing it across all of the portfolio, not the network, so it wasn't a time buy. The network was actually picking up the production budget, which was pretty significant. It was 10 by 1, so 10 one-hour episodes. And we had to quickly go out and find someone who could produce this with us. So we actually went to the producers of Project Runway and said, would you be willing to create Project Runway for cars? Done. So 2 years and 2 months later, we wrapped the final episode shooting in Detroit. And it became the most amazing project that I've ever had the privilege to work on. And the reason it was so successful, now it hasn't aired, it will air June 24th, is that everybody had to leave a bit of their ego at the door. And they had to walk in and say, if we're going to really collaborate, what does that mean? GM, what is your superpower? You know cars. Great. The network, what is your superpower? We know what our audience wants. And the Story Lab and Buena Murray, what are your superpowers? We know how to tell a great story. Great. Okay. A lot of legal issues we had to work through because, you know, GM, this is their brand, remember? This is their baby. We can't augment a car because then people will want cars that look like that and not the ones we're selling. So you can imagine the risks that they were taking in terms of doing this. But the fact is, it's paradigm shifting because GM is saying, we want to create content together. And I would argue that every one of you here, when you think about what is it that is your inalienable story, can take that to a partner, whether it's digital or whether it's linear, and think about how to tell that story in a different way. So this example, I'm just going to run, this is the promo that, that promotes the show, but think about that. Think about the idea of a brand not sponsoring a show, not integrating a show, but creating a show together with a network.
I want to be an automotive designer. It's just kind of in my blood.
I'm great at building cars and designing cars.
I'm an award-winning custom painter, and I am one hell of a wrench.
I've designed everything from space-age concept cars to executive jets.
I've spent most of my career in advanced design.
At my shop, we build cars from concept to reality.
I'm one of the people with the advantage.
I can make something that you will not believe.
Nothing stops me. I'm the buffet of talent.
They have 20 years experience in the industry, and I'm 20 years old.
10 will start, but only one will be the Motor City Master.
This show is like no other competition show because we're actually going to build the cars that we design.
You'll have just 3 days to transform these Sonics. This team challenge starts now.
If I won this show, it's almost like winning the lottery.
This show is my opportunity to walk back into Detroit.
I'd want to be known for drawing vehicles that get emotions out of people.
I think it's a tough crowd, and I think it's going to get to every man for himself, and it's going to get real.
We're going to put 1 billion hours into something that's not right.
I need some time to just draw and think.
You know what's harder than the work?
Let's see it. Let's just see it. Okay, that's what we're going to do.
Some of the peep.
This is not the way that I would have run this.
Do not underestimate anyone.
The 21-year-old with the least experience is now in the management position.
I know that I am difficult to work with. You're a point and click. You're a point and click guy.
It's not the dog in the fight. We got a lot of dogs. It's the fight in the dogs.
It's up to you to deliver something to fit the needs of a modern-day mom.
It's a lot of fun.
There is no doubt. You guys came to party.
And it's under high compression.
They didn't really have that strong of a concept.
You say you don't see it, I don't see how you could not see it.
It's almost an insult.
Are you effing kidding me?
Someone has to go home.
10 car designers, 1 lifelong dream.
I will be
The Motor City Master.
So who's telling the story of the brand? Those 10 contestants are. Their love for automotive, their love for the GM heritage, for the Chevy heritage, every episode talk about that brand. It's not about a badge shot. It's not about the car. It's about the love and passion that those individuals have for the industry and for the brand. And sometimes I feel as though one of the biggest mistakes that brands make, and I love that Adweek said this, is that they want to play the role of the hero. But today we have to make the consumer the hero. And we simply become their mentor, the facilitator of that heroic journey. So I want to show you, I've talked through 3 examples of those micro adventures. So Netflix prom, how many of you heard of Netflix prom? Not many, right? Because it's just happening. But Netflix, bravo. Muthana, right, is a fan of Netflix. And he tweets, if I get 1,000 retweets, will you go with me to my junior prom? He gets 1,000 tweets in a single day. and Netflix goes to his prom. And they give him 3 choices: his suit, his car, his ride. Who's going to drive him? And he chooses all these things, and they're from famous movies. So he chooses the Bond tuxedo, he chooses the car from Grease, and he chooses John Travolta's impersonator as his chauffeur. And he goes to prom, and he becomes a hero, and they takes the selfie, and it's all the social engagement that surrounds that. You know, think about that. I bet that probably cost, we were calculating, maybe $1,500 to pay for all those things. A fan, a hero. You made that kid a hero, because he wasn't the coolest guy at school. But for that one night, he was the coolest guy in the room. That's making someone a hero. P&G made Mom's Hero. We don't need to talk about this campaign because it was such a great campaign, because it was evocative of if you were a mom who's had a kid who's ever had a dream of being an athlete, you know what that feels like. You are a chauffeur, you are a medic, you are a cheerleader. You're the boss that gets them up every day and the one that consoles them when they lose. Because not every kid goes on to the Olympic stage. But it was something we could all resonate, right? Even if you didn't have a kid, you had a mom, you had a fan, you had a hero in your life. And GoPro makes a hero every day. Every day they put a photo of the day or a video of the day of their fans using their product. Their camera is literally called the hero. See, these are micro adventures that you can go on every day with your consumers and elevate their heroic journey through social, through paid, or just through some brand love. And my last thing that I want to leave you with, and if you hang around me long enough, I just hamper this all the time. The brands need to stop competing in the category and start winning in the culture. And I'm going to give you 2 examples, and then I'm going to give you a video to leave on. The thing about brands that compete in the category, if you think about Kodak, Kodak was competing in the category of photos being printed on paper. And they didn't actually stop to observe what was happening culturally, that we wanted to share those moments instantaneously. We wanted actually feedback on those moments, right? So if Kodak was not competing in the category, but winning in the culture, what do you think they would have invented? Instagram, right? Instagram. I'll go back to Red Bull. Red Bull doesn't sell beverages. They give you wings, right? The culture of Red Bull is that they want to give people the opportunity to fly, whether it's in motocross, whether it's jumping out of a, at the top of the world and jumping out, and 15 seconds later walking on the ground, right? Felix, man, that is watch the GoPro version of that, where it's all the cameras on his head, and get a sense of what that actually felt like. So you can see that when you really understand the culture and where you have permission to play, you can create great content to win there. You won't win every time, but you'll win most of the time. And sometimes you'll just strike a little bit of gold, and you'll end up having that moment that we all talk about, right? The kiss. I'm sure the Netflix thing is going to take off, and now that you see, you're going to see it everywhere. The guy who looked at his daughter and thought time is passing too quickly, and captured 14 years of her life in a 4-minute video. Now, that's something that a brand, you should look at what people are creating and then think about how that might relate back to your brand and begin to reverse engineer those moments. So the last example I'm going to leave you with is one of our other liquor brands. And this was a really interesting campaign because they were struggling, right? Chivas is an entry-level brand, guys that really want to hang out, enjoy the night. But there was this level of authenticity that their consumers were looking for and not finding in their work. And so we told them, it's not about the entourage lifestyle. It's about the brotherhood lifestyle. And if you're a guy, you probably know the difference. And if you're a girl, you know what sisterhood means, right? And we went out and found, we didn't have a lot of money, so we went out and found a group of guys who were actually real-life friends. It happens to be that one of them is a famous guy. And we were able to convince him to do this because his buddy, much like Alistair yesterday, is Bren Mooser. And Bren created Riot.org. And he's a guy who's basically given his life to purpose and done some amazing things. He wrote baseball. I mean, he produced baseball at the time of cholera, but got on a plane during the Haiti earthquake and went down and just was of service. That's what he wanted to do. He couldn't sit still in Hollywood anymore. And he's dated famous women. But it's all about his brotherhood and what they do for one another. And it was the perfect alchemy because we didn't have a lot of money. They all did it because they loved Bren. We let Bren produce it. He worked with the brand to really understand what it was that he needed to say through storytelling. And believe me, brands aren't perfect. You know, where's the bottle shot? Can we put the shot? And it's like, it's not about the bottle. It's about what your brand stands for. And if you just get out of the way long enough, people will begin to see that through the stories that you tell, not by what you tell them. So I'm going to roll this, and then I'm going to walk off stage so we stay on time.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because
success is measured not by money and by material goods, but by your character.
My friends, they get to do what they love for a living.
To have style is almost having like an outward externalization of your soul.
Happiness and success is having a balance.
everybody get up.
It's really special to be surrounded by your friends, because I know in life you won't let me fall.
My inspiration comes from people, the reoccurring characters that happen within humanity. Brandon Boy.
Every single one of these dudes are like that Michael Jackson video, Can You Feel It? Like when they go like this, like light shoots out their fingertips.
I've been losing sleep, dreaming about the things that we could be. But baby, I've been praying hard. Said no more counting dollars, we'll be counting.
It's those relationships, a lot of them are my guy friends that really have lasted and shaped me.
Brotherhood.
Makes me feel alive.